All right. Well, first off, I do want to say thank you, Concord, for just your prayers the past 3 years. I've been trekking slowly through seminary, but it's been beneficial. And I am so thankful for your prayers and for your support. If you are thinking about seminary, I encourage it. It's been so insightful, and there's just things that I've never seen in the Word that have been just opened up to me, and I've been so encouraged. So thank you for your support in this. Tonight we are going to be in the passage of Hebrews, chapter 12, verses 1 through 2. And as you turn there, I've titled this, and I should have made slides, but I titled this Endurance Running 101. Endurance Running 101. And as you turn there, just to kind of give you a context of Hebrews, the writer is writing to a group of believers who are beginning to kind of question their faith. The writer of Hebrews opens up with kind of displaying the glory of Christ and the fact that he is glorious, he is far above the angels, he is the Son of God, and the writer is showing this. He also shows the humanity of Christ and why and the need Christ had to come and be human and die on a cross. He does so because he gives a warning not to become weary and fall away. Some are questioning whether or not this faith is really it. Was he really it? But we're to strive for a greater rest. There's a greater rest coming. And this greater rest is waiting for us through Christ. And Jesus fulfills, but also issues this new covenant. And then, of course, we all know Hebrews 11, where he talks about the hall of faith, the many who we have read about in the Old Testament. So, anyway, so that is the context with which we are in Hebrews, and we are coming into chapter 12. And so I'm actually going to start in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 39. So if you want to start with me there, and I'm going to read through chapter 12, verses 3, to kind of gain a better context, but we're going to focus on chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. But here we are in verse 11, or chapter 11, verse 39. And it says, "And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted." Let me pray. Father, thank you for loving us, that you would send your Son to go before us and make a way in that we could be in relationship and that we could glorify you again, Father. Father, I pray, Lord, that tonight that we would be encouraged through your word, through your exhortations, God, that we would be encouraged to run this race that you have set before us. Father, speak clearly through me. Father, would you just allow the word to be the authority here tonight? And let me merely just be a messenger that has an open heart to hear. And let those that are here tonight, Father, would your Spirit begin to work in them to receive your word and your truth. Father, we ask all these things humbly in your name. Amen. So, when I was in middle school, I'm a middle school teacher, but when I was in middle school, I had made the decision to try out for cross country. It really wasn't my decision. Really, it was a decision of a coach. He encouraged me to, he said, I think that you might do well in cross country. It really wasn't my decision, and I really wasn't motivated to run long distance running. Actually, I wasn't really that great in shape. I was short, chubby, and I liked to eat fudge rounds. And but I decided that I would just do this. I would try it out. Well, it was a week-long tryout practice, and there was a particular horrible tryout day, and I remember this day vividly. I've never actually talked about it with any of my family. I'm okay now. But I do remember I didn't particularly eat well that day. I think I had 2 fudge rounds that morning, or that afternoon for lunch. And I remember that the usual run was I was always the last kid in the race, finishing the finish line. But this particular day, there was a popular kid named Brian. I remember his face distinctly, and he was struggling that day. He was having a hard day, and I was second to last. And this was encouraging to me, and so I was running. His friends were actually already done, most of the athletes that they were. And I remember distinctly them waiting on us to be finished with practice. We needed to finish the finish line for them to be done with practice, and they're cheering Brian on. And I distinctly remember, here it was, the loud yell of, Brian, don't let the slow, fat kid beat you. Well, Brian was motivated, and Brian flew past me, and I was done. I quit. Actually, I was kicked off. The coach said, we think you might be better in off season. And so that was a very discouraging day for me. But I don't say this for pity's sake. I say this because I understand that we all are in a race that's long and hard and difficult. And more than not, you may feel weary and defeated, like this defeated middle school runner, struggling just to keep running. Nevertheless, if you are a follower of Christ, you are in the race of faith. And as the writer of Hebrews says, he says, let's run, and let's run with endurance, this race that has been marked out before us. You may be growing weary. You may be struggling. This is not a sprint. It is not a dash, nor is it a walk. It's a marathon. And as many of you know, marathons include struggle and suffering and pain. But you can run. And you can run with endurance. So, but how? How are we to run? How are we to run endurance? We who are prone to become weary in this Christian life. How are we going to run with endurance? Well, tonight, let me offer 4 ways in which the writer shows that we can run this race with endurance. The first way that you can be training yourself for endurance is you can be inspired. You can be inspired to run. Look with me in verse 1, where he says, therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses. This picture, it evokes a mental picture of the Colosseum in the Greco-Roman world, where there is a crowd watching the athletes do their races, and they're cheering on. But what's really amazing about this particular verse is that it's not so much that we're seeing those that have gone before us cheering us on as much as they are a witness to the fact that the race can be run. And there's a lot of them. Hebrews 11 gives a few, but there's so many. There's so many. He says that we are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. And they're all saying the same thing. Faith can endure. They are witnesses to this. They have had their struggles. They've had their pains. They did not always run the race well, but their faith endured. And your faith can endure. I am a Bible teacher, and I do teach Genesis. And every year, I've been teaching for 6 years now through the book of Genesis. And every year, I start out going, oh man, we're starting over again. But I have to tell you, every single time I read Genesis, every single year, it is so encouraging to me. Because when you think of, say, Abraham, and you see what is said about Abraham in chapter 11, but then you go and you read his actual life in Genesis, and you see how he has failed over and over and over again. And that this man of faith, when he fails, it really declares the faithfulness of God. That despite his faithlessness, God remains faithful. And every time I read this, I'm like, thank you. It's encouraging to me because I see that I don't always run well. And there's times of faithlessness. But when I look and I read the Word of God and I study the Scriptures and I see the men of old who tripped up and failed, yet God says, here's faithful Abraham in chapter 11. Faith can endure. To endure the race, it's not enough just to be inspired, though. My next point here is going to be hard for me to say, so I'm going to look up at the ceiling. You're going to need to lose some weight. Look with me at verse 1 again. It says, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. The ESV here says weight. The NASB says encumbrance. And I find the CSB helpful for me in that it says any hindrance. The idea here is it's not just a particular sin that we're trying to lay aside. It's not just sin in general that we're laying aside. Notice that it says every weight and sin. This is hard. Because what the writer is telling us here is that maybe there's some good things in your life that are not necessarily sinful, that maybe you need to lay aside, lose the weight, to run the race. What are we getting sidetracked with? As we're on this race and we're looking, we see, hey, this over here, man, it's not something so bad, but maybe it's hindering me from really pursuing what I need to pursue. In the Greco-Roman world, the Greeks would race, and to be as quick as they possibly can, they would race naked. And the idea was that they would take off whatever clothes that they were wearing, many times things that were very heavy, that would hold them back. And they would take those off to be able to run the race with endurance, because these things would hold them back. What's holding us back? What good things, maybe things that are not necessarily sinful, what is holding you back from enduring this race of faith? Another idea is modern athletes, they put on these weighted vests in their training, and they run with these weighted vests. And as they run, it builds up muscle and it builds the endurance. And when they come to the actual race, they take these weighted vests off, and the weight is off, and they're able to go farther. Take it off. Lay it aside. Is it worth it? Is this worth it? That's the question we have to ask. Many of you know that I worked with Chris Gaither many years ago. I was actually an intern for Chris at Woodland Park for his youth group. And so you all know Chris after his marathon composition. I knew Chris before his marathon body composition. Now, he does know that I'm talking about this, and he does know that I asked for permission, and he said fine. But Chris was a little heavier than he was today, right? But I watched Chris, as I was his intern, I watched him train. And I remember specifically him coming to youth parties where pizza and Cokes and all the junk food that are just the Baptist glory. I watched him come to these events, and he would struggle to say, no, I'm not going to have that. Because he had a race to run. And they were good things that he laid aside. And as Chris trained, over time, you started to see that his body composition was changing. And his body was allowing for it to change, to be able to run with endurance. Because this extra weight, that he didn't have a lot of extra weight, but this extra weight that he had was falling off. And he was able to run with endurance. I remember his first race that he ran, a marathon. And I remember that the youth were actually at an event. He went and ran the marathon, and then immediately came to the event after the marathon. And I think, Shan, you were actually carrying him on your shoulders. It's truth. Because he ran, but there was pain and there was struggle. And he hurt. He hurt for days. For days he hurt. But the marathon is a struggle. The other idea here is sin. And it's not just something that hinders you, it actually keeps you from running. And he says, lay it aside. It's not worth it. It's not worth what you're running for. It entangles you. It keeps you from your true goal. An illustration that I thought of, because I do follow in the steps of David King, I do love Lord of the Rings as well. So I had to fit in an illustration here. But there's a scene in Lord of the Rings where Frodo is running from this giant spider named Shelob. And it's in a dark cave, and he is running for his life. And there's a scene where he is looking back, and as he's running, he gets caught up in Shelob's web. And this scene is a great picture of how sin entangles us. He's there, his legs are in the air, his arms are everywhere, his sword is hanging up over here, and he can't get anywhere. He's stuck. And the danger is pursuing him. This is sin, y'all. We get stuck in it. Sometimes we don't even realize that we're in it. And it doesn't just hinder us from the race. It entangles us and keeps us from running. So, to run with endurance, we want to be inspired. We want to lose weight. But most importantly, you've got to keep your eye on the prize. Look at verse 2 with me here. He says, let us run the race, or run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus. Looking to Jesus. Jesus is the greatest of all time. He is the founder and the perfecter of this faith. He is the goal. He is the prize. I was encouraged a couple of months ago. Will Dragoos spoke at a conference at Silverdale, and he talked about how we can easily begin to put our eyes not on Christ as the prize, but we say, even Christians, we say, man, I can't wait until I'm on the streets of glory. Or I can't wait till I'm done with just the struggles of life and it's going to be peace. None of those things are wrong. But he argued the fact that even those aren't our greatest prize. Christ himself is our prize. This understanding of the founder, or as the CSB says, the source, or NASB, the author. Another idea is he is the champion. Every other one that we've seen before has run the race with faith, but they've failed in so many ways. He's the original. He is the one that ran the race perfectly. The race set before us, he trailblazed. And we run after him. He's what we keep our eyes on. Hebrews 6:20 says this. It says, where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf. And he's not just the original. He's the perfecter. He's the one in whom faith has reached its perfection. And he's the only one who's done it perfectly. So we look to Christ. We keep our eyes on the prize. He's not only the greatest of all time, but Jesus is the ultimate inspiration. Look with me where he says, looking to Jesus, the founder, the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame. We are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. Yet Jesus is the only one who paved the perfect faith. And how did he do this? He endured the suffering of the cross. He despised the shame. That idea of despising means he thought nothing of it. Let the crowds mock. There's something greater. And it says, for the joy that was set before him, the joy that was set before him is why he ran this perfect faith. The joy that was set before him is sitting at the right hand of God, where he is exalted. Remember, the writer of Hebrews started out saying, Jesus is the most glorious there is. Angels are nothing compared to him. And who are we in light of Christ? He is glorious. He is our prize. He's why we live. Yet he became human. He humbled himself, endured the cross, despised the shame. And he was able to finish the finish line and sit at the right hand of God. I'm going to turn to Hebrews 4, verse 8 through 11 real quick if you want to turn there. It's just a few pages over to the left. We see here that Jesus finishes the finish line and he sits at the right hand of God, meaning that it's perfectly done. He's brought it about as a rest. And here we see in chapter 4, verse 8, where the writer was talking to his congregation. He says, "For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken another day later on. So then, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. Let us therefore strive to enter that rest, so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience." There is a rest coming, and it is a glorious rest. But y'all, we're in the race now. Don't get confused. Jesus paved the way. He was the perfect faith bearer. He was the original. And he finished that line, and he sat down at the right hand of God. And we too understand that we will run with pain and suffering. For the joy that's set before us is Christ himself. When we enter that Sabbath rest, don't give up. Keep running. But we're human, right? What if we take our eyes off the prize, which we so often do? What are the hindrances? What are the sins that trip us up in this race? This marathon that we're running, that we need endurance for? Could they be even the gifts of the Lord? Have we taken our eyes off Christ and put our eyes maybe on, say, our children? Something that I can struggle with easily. My joy is found in my daughter. What about career? We've taken our eyes off the prize. We've put our eyes on our career, and we've tried to find the ultimate satisfaction in our careers. Maybe even focusing on being a good Christian. Have we taken our eyes off of Christ, who is the author, the perfecter of our faith? And is our eyes on ourselves saying, okay, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? Am I just over-scrupulous to the fact that I can't even function because I don't know what the right next step is? Because I can't rest in the grace of God. I have to somehow pay this back. I need to be a good Christian. Notice what I'm saying there. I. My focus. I've lost focus. Looking to Jesus. None of those things are bad things within themselves. But they are not ultimate things. Marriage, children, career, being a good Christian, they are not the ultimate things that we look to for our faith endurance. It is Christ himself. And when we fall, it is Christ who perfects us. Is it our desires or pleasures of the world, the sin that so easily entangles us? Have we lost focus because we're so focused on what we love to dwell in? Are we focused on suffering? Or maybe the desire not to suffer? Or maybe the desire not to be shamed? If I run this race well, what will others say about me? What will What will so-and-so say about me? Oh, that's a real struggle in my own heart. I'm afraid, fearful. I'm focusing on myself rather than looking to Christ, who endured the suffering, who realized there was something so much greater than those who were mocking him as he endured the cross. These things, if we keep our eyes focused on those, there will be no endurance. You will grow weary. So let's keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith. It reminds me of Peter in Matthew 14. When Peter is in the boat, and Peter is stepping out into the storm, into the waters, and as he keeps his eyes on Jesus, he's able to walk. He's able to go through the storm. But the moment he takes his eyes off of Christ, what happens? He begins to waver. He falls. He focuses on the storm rather than the author of the storm. Concord, we do take our eyes off Jesus. We all stumble and fall. But we can know this. You're not running alone. In a marathon, in a race, oftentimes runners will have someone that run alongside them, and they're called a pacer. A pacer is someone who runs and encourages you to obviously keep pace, to encourage you whenever you want to give up, when your mental abilities are saying, I want to go, but my body is saying, just stop. What are you doing to me? And your pacer's there to help encourage you and push you through that. We're not running alone. And the first place that we can see this is the writer of Hebrews himself. Look at we're back in chapter 12. Look at what he says here. Back in verse 1, he says, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which so clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. The writer of Hebrews recognizes that he's in this race too. And this is not a command. He's your pacer, yelling out to you, let's go, we can do this. Christ is our prize. Keep your eyes focused. We're not running alone. In fact, he reminded us, before he gets into the hall of faith of chapter 11, in chapter 10, verse 23, he says this, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering. For he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. You don't just have the pacer of Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews. We are all pacers together here in this church. And he is encouraging us to keep going. And we are too. Remember those who have done it. Let's lay aside these things that don't really matter in life, that are just hindering us from pursuing Christ. Keep your eyes on the prize, Concord, Jesus. We're running towards him. Don't give up. It's hard. It's painful. There's suffering. But there's joy. I want to close this with just kind of reiterating some application for us tonight. First off, if you're not in the race, join the race. Tonight you can do that. Maybe you've thought you've been in the race this whole time, but maybe you haven't. Join the race. Look to Jesus. It's not easy, but it's worth it. For those that have been in the race, again, be inspired. How can we do this? How can we be inspired? Let me encourage you. These are simple truths, but let me encourage you to read and study the lives of those who have run the race. It's amazing to me how we know of the stories, but man, if we dwell in the stories of the Old Testament that point to Jesus, and we see it in light of Christ, if we're there, and we're meditating, and we're just living there, these faithful of old encourage me, because I see so much of myself, my failures. And it points to the fact that I need someone greater. I need Jesus. That's the motivation I want. So live, and study those who have run the race before you. Maybe that's in the Bible. Maybe it's church fathers. A particular church father that has encouraged me in the past has been Adoniram Judson, reading his biography. Maybe it's Dietrich Bonhoeffer. All of these men are not perfect, but they have been examples of those who have run the race and have endured and crossed the finish line. Others, C.S. Lewis, the church fathers. Be inspired by maybe more mature runners, those that are here at Concord, that have lived life. Maybe we need to sit down and I just need to hear, how's the race been for you? How can I encourage you? What can I learn from you? Maybe we need to keep losing weight. What are those things that we need to sit down and ponder are keeping us from running the race with endurance? Maybe they're not necessarily sinful things. What sins? What sins do you need to deal with that are entangling you? That have taken your eyes off the prize and have said, hey, just stay here for a while in the race. Remind yourself of the gospel daily. We've talked in past of having gospel conversations. This is not just for the benefit of others, but it's also for the benefit of your own race and your endurance. To talk about the gospel. Remind yourself of the gospel. To be encouraged that you are talking with others about Jesus, meaning that you are focusing on Christ himself. Remind yourself of the gospel. Remind others of the gospel. We need to call each other maybe throughout the week. Hey, we're in discipleship groups. We have Sunday school groups. But I forget to just, hey, you know what? I need to call so-and-so today. Hey, how's the running going? Are you tripping up? What's hindering you? Man, what's Christ doing in your life today? How has he shown himself faithful today? Let's keep our eyes fixed and focused on the prize. Remind ourselves that ultimately Christ and nothing else is the goal of this race. This is of utter importance, Concord. we can so easily forget that this life is not just about gaining careers or having friendships and living life well and retiring well. If that's our goal, so much greater. The fact that our goal is Christ himself. Run with endurance together. We're going to continue to meet together. Obviously, Sundays are a great time that we meet, and we do so regularly, and you are faithful. Let me encourage you not to come just to be motivated, but come to serve, to motivate others with that mindset that we're coming together, not just as a social group. We're coming together to stir each other, to remind ourselves that we need Jesus and that he is the ultimate goal and prize, and that we're not running this race just to get through the next week. We're running this race with endurance, looking farther, understanding that there's an eternal side of things, not just the temporal. Sundays are a great time to do this. Obviously, Wednesdays have been helpful. I have to say, this is where I struggle as having a 3-year-old daughter, and getting her here is a struggle, and there's some nights that I'm just tired. And she is not the easiest either. And it's a struggle and it's a fight. And I've been convicted. I've been convicted in the sense that I forget about Wednesday nights. Because it's much easier to just go home and put her to bed. D groups. I've been thankful for the D group that I've been in the past. Every single time, I leave encouraged. I've said calling each other. But when we do so, we're not just doing so just to have conversations. We're doing so to ask poignant questions, hard questions at times. Hey, I had a question and it went away. That doesn't mean that the Lord didn't want me to say it, right? So let this motivate us, Concord. Let this motivate us to see that and be reminded that we are in a race and we're running. And it's hard and it's suffering and it's painful. And there are times that we just don't want to be in this race. There are times that our attitudes are going to say and our bodies are going to say, no. But we're in it. And Christ has set the race before us. And we can run. When we want to become weary, when we want to become faint-hearted, we can run with endurance. Well, the middle school boy struggled. There was a year that running for me worked out well. And I ran probably 3 miles a day. Not a marathon. Not that crazy. All right. Not a marathon, but I got to a point where I was able to run 3 miles a day easily. And that summer, I focused on what I ate, what I was putting in my body. I focused on what things were bad for my body, so as to not pursue those things. And I had an amazing running partner who sacrificed his time to run with me. Some of you know him, Kelly O'Rear. And we were able, when we ran, we just ran together and we talked. And Kelly would push me to think about my issues with life in the lens of Christ. And he would push me to think about, hey, you know what? You're focusing on yourself here. And your faith is not dependent on these things. They were hard words, but good words. He reminded me that we were looking to Jesus and that we were running and that we needed to get to the finish line. Because at the time we were running on East Brainerd Road, and that was not a very safe place. But at the same time, we were running to finish. And you are too. And you want to become weary. But let's run, Concord. Let's run with endurance. Let me pray. Father, thank you for this moment of just being with you in your word. And Father, I pray that hearts tonight were encouraged to run, to see that there's a prize that is worth all the pain, the suffering, all the gifts that you've given us, Father. We're thankful for, but they are not our ultimate prize. They will not help us with the endurance of faith, Father, ultimately. But Father, I pray, Lord, that we could run together as a church body, as a family. We would push each other on. We would remind ourselves not to neglect meeting together so that we would strive for the greater rest. And Father, that we would run this race knowing that you've already paved the way. And let us cling to that. Father, I ask all these things humbly in your name. Amen.
I know that this is a sermon and we've been blessed, but can we just say thank you to Ryan? Because that was awesome. That really was awesome.